Catch that thief! This 4-year-old thief steals a millionaire's luxury watch. But when he manages to capture her, she throws the watch in the river and... Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun was setting over Malibu, painting the sky with orange hues that reflected on the calm waters of the Pacific. The craft fair in the town square was bustling on that Saturday afternoon, with tourists and locals milling among the colorful stalls. Theodore Ted Montgomery walked with his imposing posture, wearing a flawless Italian suit that seemed out of place in the relaxed environment. His 65 years were masked by a well-maintained appearance, a result of privileges acquired over decades in the hotel business. As he stopped to sign some autographs, a common occurrence for someone so well known in the area, a small figure darted through the crowd. Ashley, with her wild, curly hair and astute eyes, watched the businessman's every move. Her 6 years hid a sharp intelligence and a surprising determination for someone so young. The girl approached silently, her bare feet making no noise against the pavement. With a skill that would impress a magician, her small, nimble fingers reached for the watch on Ted's wrist. In a matter of seconds, the piece valued at $2 million was in her hands, and she was running through the crowd like lightning. "Stop that girl!" someone shouted, initiating a frantic chase through the historic alleys of Malibu. Ashley knew every alley, every shortcut in the town like the back of her hand. Her small stature was an advantage, allowing her to squeeze through spaces where adults couldn't pass. Ashley's heart pounded, not with fear, but with determination. In her childish mind, this desperate act had a greater purpose that no one could imagine. Her short legs carried her towards the Malibu Creek, while voices and hurried footsteps followed her closer and closer. When they finally caught up with her, Ashley was breathless, but her eyes shone with a mixture of defiance and something deeper, a sadness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Before anyone could react, she raised her arm and, with all the strength she could muster, threw the watch into the dark waters of the creek. The silence that followed was deafening. Ted, who had arrived in time to witness the scene, didn't show the reaction everyone expected. Instead of the typical fury of someone who had just seen millions literally going down the drain, his face displayed an intrigued, almost calculating expression. On the outskirts of town, in a simple house with peeling paint, Irene was preparing dinner with the few ingredients she had managed to buy with her teacher's salary. At 42, her face bore the marks of exhaustion from trying to balance her work. At the elementary school, with caring for her niece, Ashley, and her sick mother, June, sitting in her usual chair near the window, struggled to breathe as she watched the sky darken. Her 78 years weighed even heavier since she discovered the rare pulmonary disease that was consuming her. The expensive medications were a burden the family could barely carry. Suddenly, loud knocks on the door broke the peaceful routine of the house. Irene's heart sank as she saw 2 police officers standing in front of her, holding Ashley by the arm. The girl kept her chin up, but her hands trembled slightly. "Ma'am, we need to talk about a serious incident involving your niece," one of the officers announced, while Ashley ran to her grandmother's lap, who hugged her protectively. What followed was an explanation that left Irene stunned. How could her little Ashley, who could barely reach the top shelf of the kitchen, have stolen $1 million watch and then thrown it in the river? Even more disturbing, why had Ted Montgomery, known for his ruthlessness in business, decided not to press charges? That night, as the family tried to process the day's events, Ted was in his mansion, contemplating the bay through the imposing windows of his office. His face didn't reveal his thoughts, but his restless hands betrayed an unusual concern. In another part of town, a 51-year-old woman was checking her notes on a laptop. Celia Viterbo had received an interesting call that afternoon, a new case that promised to be much more than it seemed. Her experienced private detective eyes had seen a lot, but something about this story deeply intrigued her. What no one knew was that this day would mark the beginning of a series of events that would transform the lives of everyone involved. The watch lost in the waters of Malibu Creek held more than its monetary value suggested, and Ashley, in her innocence, had triggered a chain reaction that would reveal long-buried secrets. Night fell over Malibu, bringing with it a deceptive calm. While Ashley finally fell asleep, exhausted from the day's events, Ted made a call that would change the course of many lives. "I need you to investigate a family for me," he told the person on the other end of the line, his voice calculatingly controlled. "And I want absolute discretion in this case." The next morning, the family's routine tried to re-establish itself, but the weight of the events still hung in the air like a dense cloud. Irene prepared coffee while watching Ashley sitting at the kitchen table, moving the cereal in the milk without really eating it. The silence was interrupted only by June's labored breathing, who even at that hour was in her chair near the window, her favorite place to watch the street activity. "You need to tell me why you did that, sweetie," Irene tried for the 10th time, her voice full of worry. Ashley just shook her head, her curls bouncing with the movement. Her eyes, normally bright and curious, were distant, as if they held a secret too big for her age. The moment was interrupted by knocks on the door. Irene's heart raced, fearing more trouble. To her surprise, she was faced with a middle-aged woman, dressed elegantly but discreetly. "Good morning, I'm Celia Viterbo, a social worker," she introduced, herself with a calculated smile. "I'm here to talk about yesterday's incident." Celia observed every detail of the house as she was led into the simple living room. Her trained private detective eyes captured much more than she let on. The peeling walls, the worn but clean furniture, the old photographs in frames. Most of all, she noticed the various bottles of medication on the side table near the elderly woman. "We don't want to cause trouble," Irene began, wringing her hands in her apron. "Ashley has never done anything like this before. She's a good girl." Celia nodded. Her 51 years of life experience, and especially the last 5 dedicated exclusively to work after losing her husband, had taught her to read between the lines. This wasn't a family of criminals. There was something deeper going on. "Tell me about your routine," she asked, addressing Ashley, who remained glued to her grandmother. The girl remained silent, but her eyes fixed on something through the window. Celia followed her gaze and saw a man standing across the street, apparently checking his cell phone. She recognized him as another investigator hired by Ted. She wasn't the only one on the case. Meanwhile, in the oceanfront mansion, Ted paced back and forth in his office. The lost watch wouldn't leave his mind, not for the monetary value, but for what it contained. The microchip hidden inside it was his biggest concern. Years of illegal financial transactions, offshore accounts, all the access codes. It was all there, apparently lost at the bottom of Malibu Creek. "Sir, the dive team is ready to begin the search," his assistant informed him. Ted waved him away, his mind working on other possibilities. Something about that girl's behavior intrigued him. The theft had been too precise, too calculated for a 6-year-old. In his impeccably maintained garden, Walter, the 70-year-old gardener, pruned the rose bushes with the precision of someone who knows each plant by name. His watchful eyes occasionally turned to the office window, where he could see his boss. On yet another heated call, after decades of working there, the humble-looking man knew far more than anyone could suspect. At the elementary school where Irene taught, the whispers in the hallways were inevitable. The dedicated teacher, always so proper, was now the aunt of a little thief. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote on the board, trying to maintain her composure in the face of the students' curious glances. During recess, she took refuge in the teacher's lounge, where she found a mysterious envelope in her bag. Inside, there was a considerable amount of money and an anonymous note. 4. Your mother's medication. Her first instinct was to refuse this suspicious help, but the image of June, struggling to breathe, weighed on her conscience. In the afternoon, when Ashley returned from school, she found a gift on her bed. A complete art set with colored pencils, paints and quality brushes that they could never afford. There was also a simple card signed by a friend. The girl picked up one of the brushes, her small fingers caressing the soft bristles, and for the first time since the incident, her eyes sparkled. June watched her granddaughter with a mixture of concern and curiosity. In her 78 years of life, she had learned to trust her instincts, and something told her that these mysterious gifts were not mere coincidence. Her labored breathing worsened every day, and the fear of leaving her family helpless consumed her more than the disease itself. At the end of that afternoon, Ted made his first visit to the family's house. He arrived in his luxury car, causing a stir in the simple neighborhood. He introduced himself with studied politeness, as if he were genuinely interested in the well-being of that family that, until the day before, he didn't even know existed. I just came to check if everything is okay, he declared with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and also to offer help if needed. Irene wanted to refuse immediately, but before she could answer, Ashley appeared in the room. The girl stared at Ted with a disconcerting intensity, as if she could see through his carefully constructed facade. For a moment, the powerful businessman felt exposed under that childish gaze. "Do you have more watches?" Ashley asked, surprising everyone. Ted laughed, but there was an underlying tension in his voice. "I have several, sweetie. Why do you ask?" "Because you look at it all the time," the girl replied, pointing to his wrist, where there was now another luxury watch. "As if you were looking for something." The innocent comment hit Ted like a punch. How had that child noticed his nervousness about the watches? Could it be that she knew something about the microchip? Meanwhile, outside, Celia discreetly photographed the scene through the window. Her investigation was revealing interesting patterns. The family's finances, which she had checked thoroughly, showed regular deposits from an unidentified source. In recent months, someone had been helping this family long before the watch incident. Walter, who had followed his boss discreetly, watched everything from afar. His tired eyes gleamed with ancestral knowledge as he murmured to himself, It's finally starting." Night fell over Malibu, bringing with it more mysteries than answers. In the simple house, Ashley bent over her new art set, drawing with a concentration uncommon for her age. On the paper, the image of a submerged watch took shape, surrounded by something that looked like spiral code, a disturbing drawing for a 6-year-old. Ted, in his mansion, received the dive team's report. No sign of the watch in the creek. How was it possible? He was sure he had seen the girl throw it there. His suspicions grew with each hour, along with an uncomfortable feeling that he was losing control of the situation. In her lonely apartment, Celia organized the evidence collected so far. Something didn't fit in this story. Why would a businessman of Ted Montgomery's caliber be so interested in a humble family? And why would Ashley, an apparently well-cared-for and intelligent child, risk everything for such an audacious theft? The answers were there, hidden in the shadows of old secrets, waiting for the right moment to come to light. And that night, as the city slept, another mysterious envelope was left at the back door of Irene's house, this time containing information that would forever change the course of that story. The envelope found at the back door remained untouched on the kitchen table all morning. Irene watched it as she made coffee, torn between curiosity and fear of what it might contain. The last 48 hours had turned her organized life into a whirlwind of inexplicable events, and each new mystery seemed more disturbing than the last. June, sitting in her usual chair, had a particularly strong coughing fit that left her breathless. The distressing sound made Irene momentarily forget about the envelope and rush to help her mother with the inhaler. Ashley, who was drawing quietly, in the corner of the room, looked up from her paper, her expression bearing a concern far beyond her 6 years. "Grandma, did you take the new medicine?" the girl asked, surprising the two women. There was no new medicine. Or was there? Irene frowned, approaching her mother's purse. Inside, she found a bottle she had never seen before, with an imported medicine, exactly what the doctor had recommended, but which was completely beyond their financial reach. Next to the bottle, a simple note read, 3 times a day, with water. "How did this get here?" Irene murmured, her hands trembling. The writing on the note was the same as on the envelope on the table. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was Celia again, but this time she wasn't alone. Walter, the gardener from Ted's mansion, was by her side, his wrinkled face marked by a serious expression. "We need to talk," Celia said, entering the house. "About a lot of things." Walter carried an old leather briefcase, his hands calloused from decades of work, clutching it as if it held the secrets of the universe. His eyes met Ashley's, and something silent passed between them, a communication the adults couldn't understand. "First," Celia began, sitting down at the kitchen table, "I need you to know that I'm not a social worker. I'm a private detective, hired by Ted Montgomery to investigate you." Irene felt her blood run, cold. "Why? What does he want with us?" "The question," Walter interrupted, his raspy voice carrying the weight of long-held secrets, "isn't what he wants with you, but what you have that he fears losing." The old man opened his briefcase, taking out old photographs and yellowed documents. One of the photos showed a group of young men in front of a mansion, the same mansion that was now Ted's. "Do you recognize anyone, Mrs. June?" Walter asked, extending the photo. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses, her trembling fingers touching the aged paper. Her breathing became heavier, not from the disease this time, but from the emotion that overwhelmed her. "My father," she whispered, pointing to one of the men. "And this one next to him. It can't be." "The real father of Ted Montgomery," Walter confirmed. "I was there that day, just a gardener's apprentice, but I saw everything happen." The story that followed left everyone in silence. June's father and Ted's biological father were partners in a promising venture at the beginning of Malibu's development as a tourist destination. The land where the mansion stood today belonged to both of them, along with several other lots around town, including the one where June and her family now lived. "But there was an accident," Walter continued, his eyes lost in memories. "Ted's father disappeared in a storm at sea. At least that was the official story. What no one knew was that he had discovered a fraud scheme involving the man who later adopted Ted, an influential businessman who was sabotaging the partner's business to buy everything for next to nothing." Ashley, who had approached silently, picked up one of the photos. In it, a watch identical to the one she had stolen was on the wrist of Ted's real father. "The watch," the girl murmured, her eyes shining with surprising understanding. "It was his." Celia watched the scene with professional interest, but also with a growing emotion she couldn't explain. In her years of investigation, she had never been so involved with a case. "How did you know about the watch, Ashley?" the detective asked, leaning forward. The girl shrugged, a strangely adult gesture. "The man in the garden told me. He said it was important." All eyes turned to Walter, who smiled serenely. "I've been watching this family for years, fulfilling a promise I made to Ted's real father before he disappeared. The watch was more than jewelry. It was proof of everything that happened." "But why now?" questioned Irene, her head spinning with so many revelations. Because Ted is about to close a deal that will destroy the last piece of land that still legally belongs to your family, Celia explained, taking documents from her own briefcase. This land where you live was never really sold, and the original deed was hidden inside the watch. June coughed again, but there was a different light in her eyes. My father always said that the truth would come out, that he had left clues. I never understood what he was talking about. Walter got up, walking to the window. Across the street, a black car parked there betrayed that they were still being watched. The watch had a secret compartment, he explained. Where Ted now kept his chip with illegal information, there were previously documents that proved everything. And you know, the most interesting thing, the creek where Ashley threw the watch is exactly where Ted's real father was last seen. At that moment, as if the universe wanted to add another element to the mystery, the power went out throughout the neighborhood. In the sudden darkness, Ashley grabbed her school bag and took out something that shone faintly. A small, golden key. The man in the garden said I would know when to use it, she said, her childish voice carrying an ancient wisdom. Celia turned on her cell phone flashlight, illuminating the key. It was old, crafted in a style that was no longer seen, with initials engraved that matched those of Ted's father. "This was inside the watch?" Irene asked, dumbfounded. "No," Ashley replied. "It was in the special place, where the man in the garden keeps the important things." Walter smiled, a smile that carried decades of secrets. "There's a box buried," he revealed, "with everything we need to fix the mistakes of the past. But we needed the right moment, the right people." Thunder sounded in the distance, announcing an approaching storm. The same kind of storm that decades ago had changed the destiny of so many people. "And now?" Irene asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Now," Celia replied, putting away the documents. "We need to act before Ted realizes that it wasn't just a watch he lost that day." Ashley approached the window, her eyes fixed on the storm that was forming. On the horizon, lightning illuminated Malibu Bay, as if the past and the present were about to collide in an explosion of long-buried truths. The envelope on the table, still closed, seemed to pulse with its own energy, holding another piece of the puzzle that was just beginning to form. The night would be long, and the secrets that emerged with the storm would forever change the destiny of everyone involved. The storm raged over Malibu with a fury that seemed to echo the secrets about to be revealed. Inside the simple house, now lit only by candles and lanterns, the group huddled over the mysterious envelope. Irene's hands trembled as she finally opened it, revealing its contents, a series of very old newspaper clippings and a handwritten letter, yellowed with age. "Dear June," the letter began, making the elderly woman hold her breath. "If you are reading this, it means that the time has finally come. I have kept these truths for so long that they weigh on my soul like lead. Your father trusted me to keep everything secret until the right moment. And now, through little Ashley, that moment has arrived." Walter cleared his throat, his voice choked with emotion. "The letter is mine. I wrote it 15 years ago when I discovered that Ted was starting to use his father's watch to keep his own dirty secrets." The newspaper clippings told a fragmented but revealing story. The first, dated 30 years ago, announced the mysterious disappearance of Ricardo Mendonça, Ted's biological father, during a storm similar to the one that was now lashing the island. The second showed the adoption of Ted, then 10 years old, by Vincent Montgomery, the businessman who had secretly sabotaged his father's business. "But there's more," Walter continued, taking more documents from his leather briefcase. "Vincent not only stole the land, he systematically destroyed all the records linking Ricardo to Ted. He created a new story, a new identity." Celia, who had spent the last few minutes examining the papers minutely with her pocket magnifying glass, looked up. That explains why all my investigations into Ted's past kept hitting dead ends. The official story was completely fabricated. Ashley, who had been extraordinarily quiet, suddenly stood up from her corner. Her small fingers held one of the clippings as if it were something precious. "Look, Grandma," she said, pointing to a photograph. "The girl in the photo looks just like you." June adjusted her glasses with trembling fingers, bringing the clipping closer to her tired eyes. The photograph showed a group of young people in front of an old building. Among them, a girl with dark hair and a sweet smile. Herself, decades ago, stood next to Ricardo Mendonça. "We were all so young," June whispered, her voice full of memories. "Ricardo had so many dreams for this island, for his son." A coughing fit interrupted her, making Irene run to get water and the mysterious medication. "But why didn't Ted ever find out the truth?" Irene asked after settling her mother. "Surely there must have been clues over the years." Walter got up, walking to the window. The rain lashed against the glass with force, creating dancing shadows on the walls of the room. Vincent was meticulous. Every document, every photograph, every person who could tell the truth, everything was carefully removed or silenced. Except the watch, Celia completed, her eyes shining with understanding, the only object that connected Ted to his real father. "And the key," added Ashley, playing with the golden object between her small fingers. "The man in the garden said it opened something important." At that moment, a noise at the back door made everyone freeze. Celia was the first to react, moving silently to the source of the sound. When she opened the door, she found a soaked figure. It was Robert, the janitor of the school where Irene worked. "Sorry for the hour," he said, entering and shaking the water from his coat. "But I needed to warn you. Ted was at the school today, asking questions about teacher Irene and little Ashley. Irene felt her blood run cold." "What kind of questions?" "About your routine, about when you started living here," Robert replied, accepting the towel that June offered him. But the strangest thing was that he seemed especially interested in knowing if you had ever touched the basement of the house. All eyes turned to Ashley, who had stopped playing with the key. Her small face was serious, almost adult in its expression. "The treasure is down there," she said simply. "The man in the garden showed me in a dream." Walter nodded slowly. Ricardo built several houses in this area, all with special basements. Safe places to keep important documents in case something went wrong. And it did. Celia was already standing, her flashlight illuminating the path to the door that led to the basement. It was a simple door, made of old wood, that everyone had always assumed was locked by a broken lock. "Wait," Walter said, his voice urgent. "We can't open it now. Ted has people watching the house. If they find out we found the basement..." A particularly strong thunderclap made the windows shake. In the street, the lights of a car passing slowly briefly illuminated the room, making everyone duck instinctively. "We need a plan," Celia said, her investigative instinct taking over. "And we need to act fast. Ted isn't a fool. If he's already asking questions at the school, he'll soon put the pieces together." "There's one more thing," added Robert hesitantly. "I heard him on the phone, talking about demolishing this entire block. Something about a new resort." Irene sat down heavily, her legs weak. "They can't do that. This house, it's all we have." "And it's legally yours," stated Walter firmly. "The documents in the basement prove that, but we need to be smart about how we're going to retrieve them." Ashley, who had been drawing quietly throughout the conversation, suddenly showed her paper. In the drawing, there was a detailed map of the basement, with passages and exits that no one knew existed. "How do you know this, sweetie?" asked Celia, impressed with the accuracy of the drawing. "The man in the garden doesn't just show me in dreams," replied Ashley. He tells stories when no one is looking, stories about the real father of the man. With the watch, Walter smiled, a smile full of secrets. Ricardo was a cautious man. He built escape routes in all his properties. He never fully trusted Vincent, even before he discovered his true intentions. A new noise, this time coming from the front of the house, interrupted the conversation. Through the window, they could see more cars arriving. Luxury cars that clashed completely with the simple neighborhood. "He's coming," Walter whispered. "Ted has always been impatient. He must have realized that something is happening." "Quick," Celia said, taking command. "Robert, take Mrs. June through the back to your house. Irene, gather only the essentials. Walter, I'll take care of the little one," completed the gardener, picking up Ashley. "I know every inch of this neighborhood, every secret passage that Ricardo built." "And me?" asked Ashley, her voice small but firm. "You, my dear," replied Walter with a gentle smile, "will help me tell the story that your heart already knows, the story that your grandfather wanted told." As the group prepared to separate, the sound of footsteps on the porch made everyone freeze. The storm raged outside, but the real tempest was just beginning. That night, secrets buried for decades would begin to emerge, and nothing in Malibu would be the same after the truth came to light. The footsteps on the porch grew closer and closer, echoing like a harbinger of the storm. In a matter of seconds, which seemed like an eternity, the group needed to make crucial decisions. Walter, with surprising agility for his 70 years, guided Ashley to an apparent broom closet in the kitchen. With a precise movement, he revealed a narrow passage, camouflaged on the wall. "You first, little one," he whispered, helping the girl. "Enter. Remember what we practiced." Irene, torn between fear and disbelief, watched the scene while helping Robert lead June to the back of the house. Her mother, normally debilitated by the disease, seemed to have found an inner strength that kept her firm and determined. "Daughter," called June, her voice low but clear, "get the sewing box in my room, the blue one with flowers." Celia, who kept her eyes fixed on the front door through a crack in the curtain, frowned. "We don't have time for—" "Get the box," insisted June, with an authority that admitted no challenge. "There are more secrets in this house than you imagine." While Irene ran to get the box, the knocks on the door began. They weren't polite knocks of a nighttime visit. They were the authoritarian knocks of someone who is used to having their demands met immediately. "Mrs. Irene," Ted's voice sounded falsely cordial, "we need to talk. It's about your family's future." Celia quickly organized the room, hiding all the documents and clippings that were exposed. With a silent gesture, she indicated for Robert to take June out the back door. The heavy rain provided perfect cover for their escape. Irene returned, with the sewing box just as the knocks became more insistent. Walter, who had just closed the secret passage, took the box from her trembling hands and opened it carefully. Inside, among threads and needles, was a set of old photographs and a handwritten notebook. "Your mother," he explained quickly, "was Ricardo's confidant. She kept everything she could when she realized something was wrong." "Open this door now!" Ted's voice now carried a thinly veiled threat. Celia took control of the situation. "Irene, you need to answer it. Act normal. Walter and I will disappear, but we'll be close by." The gardener nodded, putting the notebook in his worn coat. "Little Ashley is safe. She knows exactly what to do." Before they could say anything else, Walter and Celia disappeared through the same secret passage that Ashley had used, leaving Irene alone to face Ted. With trembling hands, she finally opened the door. Ted was standing on the porch, impeccable in his dark suit, despite the torrential rain. Behind him, two men with umbrellas created an intimidating image. "Good evening, Mrs. Irene," he smiled, his eyes scanning the interior of the house. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." It's late," she stammered, trying to maintain her composure. "My mother is already asleep." "That's a shame," Ted replied, entering without being invited. "I would very much like to talk to her. About the past." The way he pronounced the last word made Irene shiver. There was something predatory in his behavior, as if every move was calculated to intimidate. "You know," he continued, walking through the room, "it's fascinating how fate works. Your niece steals my watch, and that leads me to discover so many interesting coincidences." His fingers lightly touched the frame of a photograph on the wall, an image of young June smiling in front of the house. Ted tilted his head, studying the photo with a disturbing intensity. This house, for example, built in the same style as the other properties of the former owner of these lands. Ricardo Montgomery, does the name ring a bell? Irene felt her heart race. "No, I don't know him." "No?" Ted turned to her, his smile now clearly menacing. "Curious, because I found very interesting records today. Your mother not only knew Ricardo, but was present on the day he disappeared. A particularly loud thunderclap made the lights flicker, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When the lighting returned, Ted was dangerously close to Irene. "Where is the girl?" he asked, his voice now stripped of any pretense of cordiality. At a friend's house," Irene replied, taking a step back. "With all this rain." "Don't lie to me," Ted thundered, his face contorted into a mask of fury. "I know she's here. I know you're all here. The treacherous gardener, the incompetent detective, all conspiring behind my back." At that moment, a noise coming from the basement caught everyone's attention. Ted smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, so that's where you're hiding the secrets." He gestured to his men, who immediately headed to the basement door. Irene felt her blood run cold. Was Ashley really safe? But before they could reach the door, a shrill fire alarm sound filled the air. Smoke began to pour from under the kitchen door, causing the men to back away. "Fire!" someone shouted from the street. "The house is on fire!" The confusion that followed was surreal. Neighbors began to gather outside, some already with hoses and buckets, while Ted's men were divided between continuing their search and dealing with the apparent emergency. Ted, however, remained impassive. "An interesting trick," he said, his eyes fixed on Irene. "But it won't work. I'm going to find out what you're hiding, and when that happens..." His threat was interrupted by a new noise, this time coming from above. A sound of footsteps on the roof, followed by what seemed to be childish laughter. "Ashley!" he called, his eyes wide with anger and disbelief. But it wasn't Ashley. When everyone ran outside to check, they saw only shadows moving across the roofs of neighboring houses, like a group of children playing in the rain. "Search every house," ordered Ted, his voice almost hysterical. "They can't have gone far." As his men dispersed through the neighborhood, Irene noticed a discreet movement in the window of the second floor of the house next door. For a brief moment, she saw Ashley's smiling face, protected by Walter, before they both disappeared again into the shadows. The smoke, which she now realized was just an artificial smokescreen, was beginning to dissipate. Ted, soaked and furious, faced Irene one last time. "This isn't over," he promised. "I'll be back with the police, with warrants, with everything I need. This house and all its secrets will be mine." When he finally left, taking his men with him, Irene allowed herself to slide to the floor, her legs too weak to support her. In the kitchen, the secret passage opened again, revealing Celia. "You were amazing," praised the detective, helping her up. "You kept your cool exactly as we needed." "But what now?" asked Irene, her voice trembling. "He'll be back with authorities." "Now," Celia replied, a mysterious smile on her lips, "we're going to show Ted Montgomery that some truths are stronger than all the money in the world." Somewhere in the rainy night, protected by shadows and secrets, Ashley held Walter's hand tightly as they moved through passages that even Ted didn't know existed. In her other hand, the golden key shone softly, like a promise that the truth, no matter how long it stays buried, always finds a way to come to light. The early morning slowly dawned over Malibu, the storm finally beginning to lose strength. In Celia's small apartment, now transformed into an improvised headquarters, the group gathered again. June rested on the only available couch, her breathing still labored, but her eyes shone with a liveliness not seen for a long time. Irene walked nervously back and forth, while Ashley, apparently oblivious to the tension of the adults, drew intently in a corner. "We need to understand exactly what we have in hand," Celia said, spreading the documents they had managed to save on the dining table. The notebook found in June's sewing box was open, revealing a delicate and precise handwriting. "These are Mom's notes," explained June, her voice full of emotion. "She worked as a secretary for Ricardo and Vincent before everything happened. She recorded everything, every meeting, every agreement." Walter, who had been silently watching the rain through the window, approached the table. "Your mother knew something was wrong long before Ricardo disappeared. She started making copies of important documents, keeping parallel records." "But why?" questioned Irene, stopping her nervous pacing. "Why would my grandmother risk it like that?" A sad smile crossed June's face. "Because she and Ricardo were more than boss and secretary. They were true friends. He trusted her, told her about his fears, his suspicions about Vincent." Celia picked up one of the old photographs, studying it carefully. The image showed a group of people in front of a construction site, the beginning of the construction of Malibu's first hotel. "Here," she pointed to a figure in the background. "This is Vincent Montgomery, isn't it? Notice how he looks at Ricardo and his secretary. There's something predatory in that look." Walter nodded gravely. Vincent was always a man consumed by ambition. When he discovered that Ricardo had found old documents proving that large areas of Malibu legally belonged to traditional families, he realized that his dream of turning the island into a hotel empire was threatened. "What's in the rest of the notebook?" asked Irene, leaning over the table. June leafed through a few pages, her hand trembling slightly. "There are records of suspicious meetings, names of people Vincent bribed, dates of irregular bank transfers." Her voice was interrupted by a severe coughing fit. Ashley, who until then seemed absorbed in her drawings, suddenly got up and walked to her grandmother. Without saying a word, she handed her a glass of water and the mysterious medication that had appeared in her bag. "How do you always know, sweetie?" asked June after taking the medicine. "How do you know exactly when I need it?" The girl shrugged, a gesture that seemed strangely mature in her 6-year-old body. "The man in the garden. It taught me to observe. He says sometimes eyes see more than words can say." Celia watched the interaction with growing interest. In her years as a detective, she had learned to trust her instincts, and something about the connection between Ashley and Walter went beyond what it seemed. "Walter!" she called, her voice calculatingly casual. "How long exactly did you work for Ricardo before he disappeared?" The gardener smiled, a smile that carried decades of secrets. "Officially, I started as a gardener's apprentice 3 months before the incident. But the truth," he paused, looking significantly at Ashley, "is that Ricardo and I had known each other for much longer." At that moment, a noise coming from the street caught everyone's attention. Cars were stopping in front of the building. Celia ran to the window, her features hardening as she recognized the vehicles. "Ted," she whispered, "and it looks like he brought reinforcements." "Impossible!" exclaimed Irene. "How did he find out where we were?" Walter, however, didn't seem surprised. He always knew, just as he knew that I was never just a gardener. All attention turned to him. The old man walked slowly to his leather briefcase, from which he took a sealed and yellowed envelope. "Ricardo gave me this on the day he disappeared," he revealed. He said it should only be opened when we found someone with the gift of seeing beyond appearances, his eyes fixed on Ashley. Someone like her. The girl approached, her eyes shining with an understanding that went beyond her age. Without hesitation, she reached for the envelope. "Wait," interrupted Celia. "We need to get out of here first. Ted is coming up with his men." But Ashley had already taken the envelope, with the same surprising skill that she had demonstrated when stealing the watch. Her small fingers found an invisible opening in the paper. From inside fell an old key, almost identical to the one she already possessed, and a small piece of paper with a single sentence written, "The true treasure is where the sun rises twice." "The lighthouse!" exclaimed June suddenly. "Ricardo always said that from the old lighthouse you could see the sun rise twice, once on the horizon and again reflected in the bay." Heavy footsteps in the hallway indicated that their pursuers were close. Walter quickly put away the envelope, while Celia began to turn off the lights. "There's a passage," said Ashley calmly, pointing to an apparent broom closet. "Just like the one in our house the man in the garden showed me in the drawing." Everyone looked at the paper where she had been drawing. They weren't childish scribbles, but a detailed map of the building with secret passages marked in red. "How?" began Irene, but was interrupted by loud knocks on the door. "Open up, in the name of the law," thundered Ted's voice, followed by the sound of keys being inserted into the lock. "Quick!" whispered Walter, already opening the closet and revealing a narrow passage. "Ashley first, she knows the way." The girl didn't hesitate, sliding into the passage as if she had done it hundreds of times. June was next, surprisingly agile despite her condition. "The documents!" reminded Celia, running to collect everything from the table. "Leave them," said Walter with a mysterious smile. "Ted can have those. The real ones are safe with those who always have been." The door began to give way under pressure when the last members of the group disappeared through the secret passage. When Ted finally burst into the apartment, he found only an empty room, and on the table, a sheet of paper with a childish drawing. An old watch submerged in the waters, surrounded by colorful fish. In the drawing, a detail that only very attentive eyes would notice. Inside the watch there were no mechanisms, but a set of golden keys, each marked with a different symbol. Meanwhile, through tunnels and passages that seemed to exist since the foundation of the island, the group moved towards the old lighthouse. Ashley led the way with an inexplicable confidence, as if each step had been rehearsed in dreams. "Did Ricardo build all these passages?" asked Irene, marveling at the complexity of the system. "No," replied Walter, his voice echoing softly on the damp walls. "He just rediscovered what was already here. Malibu keeps secrets much older than all of us." Ahead, Ashley began to hum a soft melody, the same one that Ricardo used to sing to his son Ted before everything changed. It was a song about hidden treasures and truths that time cannot erase. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, but the real storm was just beginning. The old lighthouse stood against the still, stormy sky as a silent guardian of centuries-old secrets. The group emerged from a passage disguised among the rocks at the base, all soaked and breathless from the long walk through the tunnels. June, surprisingly, seemed stronger than ever, as if the proximity of the answers they had been seeking for so long gave her renewed energy. "It's here," said Ashley, her small fingers pointing to an almost imperceptible mark on the stone wall of the lighthouse. It was a symbol carved delicately into the rock, similar to those that appeared in her drawings, a rising sun over stylized waves. Walter approached, his calloused fingers tracing the outline of the symbol with reverence. "Ricardo spent years studying the ancient history of Malibu," he explained, his voice filled with memories. "He discovered that long before the Spanish, even before the first settlers, Malibu already held its own secrets. Celia, ever practical, kept her eyes attentive to the surrounding environment. "We need to hurry. It won't take long for Ted to realize where we've come." "No," Walter interrupted. "We need to wait. The sun needs to rise twice." As if responding to a silent command, Ashley sat down on the damp ground and began to draw in the dirt with a twig. Her strokes, surprisingly precise for a child her age, began to form a complex map. "Look," said Irene, leaning over the drawing. "They're all the properties that belong to Ricardo." "Not only that," added June, her eyes shining with recognition. "They're the same places marked in my mother's notebook. Every property, every piece of land that Vincent stole." Walter smiled, a smile that carried decades of secrets and promises. Ricardo knew that Vincent would eventually betray him. That's why he created a complex system of protection for his most valuable assets. Not just documents and deeds, but proof of all the irregularities that Vincent had been committing. "But why wait so long?" questioned Celia, her investigative mind always seeking connections. "Why not use that evidence before?" The old gardener knelt beside Ashley, watching her add more details to the drawing. "Because Ricardo knew it wasn't just about proving the truth. It was about finding the right person to reveal that truth." At that moment, Ashley stopped drawing and looked at the horizon. The sky began to lighten slightly, announcing the proximity of dawn. "She has the gift," Walter continued, his voice soft, "just like Ricardo had, the ability to see beyond appearances, to understand the hidden patterns in the simplest things." Irene hugged her niece protectively. "Is that why she always knew where to find the secret passages? Why she was able to steal the watch with such precision?" "Partly," Walter replied, "but there's more, much more." He took a small leather book from his coat, its pages yellowed with age. "This was Ricardo's personal diary. He entrusted it to me on the day he disappeared, along with a specific mission." The group gathered closer as Walter opened the diary. The pages were filled with notes, drawings, and symbols, many of them identical to those that Ashley used to make. "Ricardo had a son," Walter began, his voice trembling slightly. "A brilliant boy who, like him, had the gift. But Vincent realized the potential of that ability. He saw how he could use it for his own interests." "Ted," June whispered, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together in her mind. "Yes," confirmed Walter. "Vincent not only stole Ricardo's properties, he stole his son. He convinced Ted, still a child, that his father had abandoned him. He trained him to use his gift not to see the truth, but to manipulate it." Ashley, who had remained extraordinarily quiet, suddenly stood up. "The sun is almost rising," she announced, her small voice carrying an ancient certainty. The group watched in silence as the first ray of sunlight emerged on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The light, reflecting in the waters of the bay, truly created the illusion of a second sunrise. "Now," said Ashley, taking the 2 golden keys from her pocket. With surprising precision, she inserted them into 2 almost invisible slots in the symbol carved on the wall of the lighthouse. The sound of ancient mechanisms creaking echoed through the structure. Slowly, a section of the wall began to move, revealing a secret chamber. Inside, stone shelves held sealed metal boxes, each marked with the same rising sun symbol. But what caught everyone's attention was an object in the center of the chamber, a watch identical to the one Ashley had stolen from Ted. "The original watch," Walter explained, his voice reverent. "The one Ricardo wore, with all the original evidence still inside it." At that moment, the sound of approaching engines broke the silence of the morning. Ted had arrived. "Quick!" instructed Celia, helping Walter collect the boxes. "We need to—" But Ashley was already in motion. With the same extraordinary skill that she had demonstrated before, the girl took the watch and, to everyone's astonishment, opened a secret compartment that no one had noticed. From inside fell an old photograph. In it, a younger Ricardo held a small Ted in his arms, both smiling in front of the same lighthouse where they were now. "Dad." Ted's voice, laden with restrained emotion, surprised everyone. He was standing at the entrance of the chamber, alone, his normally controlled face showing signs of deep commotion. "How did you—" began Irene, but Walter interrupted her with a gentle gesture. "She brought him here," said the gardener, indicating Ashley with a nod, "in the same way that Ricardo always knew it would happen." Ted took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the photograph in his hands. I remember this day. Dad brought me here to see the sun rise twice. He said," his voice faltered, "he said that one day I would understand that some truths need to be seen twice to be truly understood." Ashley approached him without fear, her eyes meeting Ted's with a wisdom that transcended her age. "The man in the garden said that you could see too, before you forgot how." The girl's words seemed to strike something deep within Ted. His legs weakened, and he leaned against the stone wall. "Vincent," he murmured, long repressed memories surfacing. "He made me forget. He made me see only what he wanted me to see." The sun was now completely above the horizon, its reflection in the bay truly creating the illusion of a double dawn. The light flooded the secret chamber, illuminating decades of hidden truths. "It's not too late," said Walter softly, placing a hand on Ted's shoulder. Ricardo knew this day would come. He never lost hope that his son would find his way back to the truth. But before Ted could answer, the sound of more cars approaching broke the moment. Vincent had arrived, and with him the final confrontation that would define the fate not only of one family, but of all of Malibu. The old lighthouse, silent witness to so many secrets, seemed to hold its breath as Vincent Montgomery's footsteps echoed on the spiral staircase. Ted, still holding the photograph with trembling hands, instinctively positioned himself in front of the group. His eyes, once clouded by decades of lies, now shone with a newfound clarity. "Walter," he whispered without taking his eyes off the entrance, "take everyone through the lower passage. I'll deal with him." But Ashley, contrary to all expectations, stepped forward. "No," she said, her childish voice carrying surprising authority. "We need to stay. The man in the garden said that everyone needs to see the truth together." Walter nodded, understanding something that the others couldn't yet see. With deliberate movements, he began to position the metal boxes in a specific pattern on the floor of the chamber, following an invisible design that only he and Ashley seemed to recognize. Irene hugged her niece protectively, while June, surprisingly calm, sat on a stone block, her hands gripping tightly the sewing box she hadn't let go of throughout the journey. Celia, ever alert, noticed something peculiar. The light of the rising sun, reflecting on the metallic surfaces of the boxes, began to form patterns on the walls of the chamber. They were the same symbols that Ashley drew, the same ones that Ricardo had studied. Vincent finally appeared at the entrance, his imposing 75-year-old figure contrasting with the ancient stone of the lighthouse. His eyes, cold as steel, scanned the scene with a mixture of disdain and irritation. "So this is where our little treasure hunt ends." His voice was smooth, almost paternal, but carried an underlying venom. "Ted, my son, I thought we had already moved past these childish fantasies." "Don't call me son," Ted's response came as a growl. "You were never my father. You stole that position, just as you stole everything else." Vincent laughed, a joyless sound that echoed through the stone walls. "Stole? I saved you, you ingrate. Your father was a dreamer, a fool who believed in legends and magical symbols. I gave you purpose, power, success. You gave him chains, June's voice, clear and firm, surprised everyone. The elderly woman stood up, her physical frailty belied by the strength in her gaze. Chains made of lies and manipulation. Vincent turned to her, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Ah, the daughter of the meddling secretary. Your mother was a sentimental fool too, you know, keeping evidence, making hidden copies, as if that could change anything. It changed everything, replied Walter, finishing positioning the last box. The pattern was now complete, and the reflected light formed a complex web of symbols throughout the chamber. Ricardo knew this day would come. He prepared everything, waiting for the right moment. Vincent took a step forward, his composure beginning to crack. Ricardo is dead. I made sure of that myself 30 years ago. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. Ted staggered as if he had been punched, his darkest suspicions finally confirmed. You killed him? His voice was just a whisper. I did what was necessary, Vincent replied, all pretense of civility abandoned. He was going to ruin everything. He was going to hand over the land to those worthless families, destroy the tourist potential of the island with his nonsense about preservation and history. As he spoke, Ashley moved silently to the center of the pattern formed by the boxes. With the precision of a dancer, she began to spin the lids of the boxes in a specific sequence. Each movement produced a soft click, like gears of a giant clock falling into place. What is that brat doing? Vincent advanced threateningly, but Ted blocked his path. Don't take another step, he warned, years of repressed anger emerging in his voice. You've caused enough destruction. At that moment, a hidden mechanism in the walls began to function. Stone panels slid open, revealing secret compartments, filled with documents, photographs, and most impressively, a series of recordings on old tapes. Ricardo never fully trusted you, explained Walter, his voice filled with contained satisfaction. He recorded every meeting, documented every negotiation, including the last one, when you threatened him. Celia, who had approached the compartments, began to examine the documents with professional eyes. It's all here, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Every fraud, every threat, every forged document, 30 years of crimes perfectly documented. Vincent laughed again, but there was a tone of despair in his voice. And who will believe it? I have judges, politicians, businessmen, all in my pocket. It's not about believing anymore, replied Ashley, her childish voice echoing strangely in the chamber. The girl had finished her sequence, and something extraordinary was happening. The reflected lights began to move, converging to the center of the room. In the air, as a three-dimensional projection created by the sunlight reflecting on the metallic surfaces, appeared an image. Ricardo Montgomery, younger, recorded in a type of primitive but ingenious hologram. If you are seeing this, the recording began. It means they have found the child with the gift. It means that the truth can finally be revealed. Ted fell to his knees, tears running freely down his face. The voice of his father, preserved through the decades by a technology that mixed science and the ancient knowledge of the island, filled the chamber with an almost physical presence. My son, the recording continued, if you are there, know that I never abandoned you. Vincent may have stolen your gift, but he cannot steal your future. The gift you have, that this special child also possesses, is not about seeing impossible things. It's about seeing the truth behind the lies, the light behind the shadows. Vincent, for the first time, seemed truly shaken. His empire, built on lies and crimes, was about to collapse not by the force of the law, but by the force of a truth preserved through the decades by a man he thought he had silenced. But before anyone could react, a new sound filled the air. Sirens, many sirens, approaching rapidly to the lighthouse. I called reinforcements, said Vincent, recovering some of his arrogance. In a few minutes, this place will be surrounded by people who will do exactly what I tell them to. However, Celia smiled, a smile that suggested she knew something he didn't. "Are you sure they are your reinforcements, Vincent?" The detective pulled a small device from her pocket, a transmitter. "While you were busy chasing shadows across the island, I was busy sending digitized copies of all this evidence to every investigative agency in the country. The sirens you are hearing are from the FBI." Vincent's face lost all color. With a movement surprisingly agile for his age, he turned to flee, only to find his way blocked by Walter. "Not this time, old friend," said the gardener, his voice laden with an authority until then hidden. "Some truths need to be seen twice, remember, and now, finally, everyone can see." The sunlight, now completely above the horizon, flooded the chamber through the old lighthouse windows. The second reflection, mirrored in the bay, completed the phenomenon that Ricardo had discovered so many years ago. The moment when the truth could no longer hide in the shadows. And in the center of everything, Ashley smiled, her eyes shining with an ancient wisdom as she held the two golden keys, the keys that had finally unlocked not only a secret chamber, but decades of suppressed truths. The double sunrise was already over, but the light that flooded the lighthouse chamber seemed to have a life of its own, dancing among the metallic surfaces of the boxes in hypnotic patterns. The sound of sirens grew closer and closer, echoing through the ancient structure like a harbinger of change. Vincent, cornered between Walter and the truth he could no longer deny, seemed to have aged decades in a matter of minutes. Ted remained, kneeling, his hands gently touching the surface where the projection of his father had appeared. Long-buried memories emerged in his mind like bubbles rising to the surface of a deep lake. Reminiscences of mornings spent in this same lighthouse, watching the phenomenon of the double sunrise as his father taught him about the secrets of Malibu. "You made me forget," he murmured, his voice laden with a mixture of pain and anger as he turned to Vincent. "You didn't just kill my father, you killed my memories of him." June, who was watching the scene with attentive eyes, suddenly opened her sewing box. Between threads and needles, she removed a small amber vial. "It wasn't just the memories, Ted," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Vincent was drugging you. My mother discovered this weeks before Ricardo disappeared." Celia took the vial, examining it with professional interest. "Some kind of mind control medication." "Ah, worse," replied Walter, approaching to observe the vial. "It was a mixture specially developed to suppress what Ricardo called the gift. The ability to see beyond appearances, to perceive the hidden connections." Vincent laughed bitterly. "You make it seem mystical, something special. It was just a genetic anomaly, an increased sensitivity to patterns and subliminal information. Ricardo wasted that gift with his romantic theories about preservation and history. I gave Ted a real purpose for that ability." Purpose. Ted stood up, years of manipulation turning into a cold and controlled anger. "You turned me into a tool. You taught me to use the gift to manipulate people, to find their weaknesses and exploit them." Ashley, who had been extraordinarily quiet, suddenly moved. With the natural grace of a child who knows no limitations, she began to rearrange the metal boxes in a new pattern. The reflected light changed, forming new constellations of symbols on the ancient walls. "What is she doing?" asked Irene, watching her niece with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "She's reading," replied Walter, a gentle smile on his wrinkled face. "Ricardo developed this system, a way to store information not only in documents, but in patterns of light, something that only someone with the gift could fully understand." As Ashley moved the boxes, new projections began to appear on the walls. They were no longer just images of Ricardo, but a complex web of information. Maps of the island overlaid with ancient markings, documents that seemed to shine with hidden meanings, connections that only now became clear. "It's an archive," Ted whispered, his eyes widening with renewed understanding. A living archive, telling not only the history of the island, but revealing how everything is connected. Vincent took a step forward, his mask of control finally shattering completely. "You don't understand. I did what was necessary. This island was a forgotten piece of land when I got here. I turned it into a tourist destination, into an empire." "At the cost of how many lives?" June's voice cut through the air like a blade. "How many families did you destroy? How many dreams did you steal?" At that moment, heavy footsteps echoed on the lighthouse stairs. Federal agents, led by a woman with a stern expression, entered the chamber. "Vincent Montgomery," she announced, "you are under arrest for a list of crimes that will keep us busy for a long time." But before the agents could approach, Ashley completed her pattern. The light in the chamber pulsed once, and then, like a silent explosion of truth, the walls of the lighthouse transformed into a living screen of memories and evidence. Each surface showed a different part of the story. Vincent manipulating documents, threatening people, ordering the sabotage of Ricardo's businesses, and most devastating, the final recording, the confrontation that led to Ricardo's disappearance. "How?" Vincent staggered, his arrogance finally destroyed by the weight of the exposed truth. "Ricardo knew this day would come," explained Walter. "He turned this lighthouse into more than an archive. He turned it into an incorruptible witness. Every crime, every manipulation, every lie, everything was recorded by the light and the symbols you never bothered to try to understand." The federal agent watched the projections with professional interest. Impressive, decades of evidence, preserved in a way that no one could tamper with. Ted approached Vincent, who now seemed to have shrunk, as if the weight of his lies finally crushed him. "You took my father from me. You took my ability to see the truth, but you couldn't destroy what he built." Ashley, finishing her rearrangement of the boxes, walked over to Ted and took his hand. The simple, innocent gesture carried a power that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "The man in the garden said that you can see again," she said, her childish voice carrying an ancient wisdom. "The bad medicine is already out of your body. Now you just need to remember what it's like to look with your heart." As Vincent was led away by the agents, Walter began to explain to the investigators how the archiving system created by Ricardo worked. Celia, meanwhile, methodically organized each piece of physical evidence found in the boxes. June, watching, everything with teary eyes, held Irene's hand. "Your sister, she always knew that Ashley was special. That's why she entrusted the girl to you before she left." Irene hugged her mother, silent tears running down her face. "And now? What happens?" "Now," replied Ted, his voice carrying a new determination, "we start to fix what was broken. Not just the documents and the properties, but the lives that were affected." The sunlight, now high in the sky, continued to dance among the metallic surfaces, revealing new patterns, new truths. In the center of everything, Ashley smiled, her eyes shining with the same gift that Ricardo had recognized in his son so many years ago. The gift of seeing the truth behind appearances, of finding light even in the deepest shadows. But while the group began to process the events of the morning, no one noticed one last pattern of light forming discreetly in a corner of the chamber, a symbol that suggested that there were still more secrets to be revealed, more truths to be discovered. The story of Malibu and its guardians was far from over. The hours that followed Vincent's arrest were a whirlwind of activity in the old lighthouse. Forensic teams meticulously documented every piece of evidence, while technology experts tried to understand the complex archiving system created by Ricardo. In the midst of All this movement Ashley continued to rearrange the metal boxes in different patterns, revealing increasingly deeper layers of information. "It's amazing," murmured one of the technicians, observing the projections that changed with each new arrangement. "It's as if the system responds to her instinctively." Ted, who had remained silent for some time, watched the girl with a mixture of admiration and sadness. Memories of his own childhood, of similar moments with his father, began to emerge with renewed clarity. "She reminds me of you," said Walter, approaching silently. "The same concentration, the same natural connection with the patterns. Before Vincent started to drug me," Ted completed, his voice bitter. "How long did you know?" The old gardener sighed, his tired eyes fixed on the dancing projections. "Ricardo discovered it weeks before he disappeared. Vincent was mixing a special compound into his breakfast coffee, something developed specifically to suppress his sensitivity to the patterns." At that moment, June approached, carrying her inseparable sewing box. "It wasn't just the coffee," she said, removing a thin notebook from a secret compartment of the box. "My mother documented everything. Vincent had people everywhere, at school, in the restaurants you frequented, even among the employees of the mansion." Ted took the notebook with trembling hands. The pages were filled with detailed notes, dates, names, locations, a complex network of manipulation and control that stretched for decades. "That's why you never left the garden," he said to Walter, finally understanding. "You were protecting me, even without being able to tell me the truth." "The garden was the only place where Vincent couldn't control everything," confirmed the old man. "The plants, the flowers, they have their own patterns, their own way of communicating truths that cannot be suppressed." Irene, who had been helping the investigators to catalog documents, suddenly drew everyone's attention. "We found something," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They are plans of all the properties that Ricardo built." Celia approached quickly, her professional eyes examining the yellowed documents. "They're not just architectural plans," she observed. "They are maps of entire systems, passages, secret chambers, connection points." "An underground network," completed Ashley, without taking her eyes off her work with the boxes. "The man in the garden said that the whole island is connected." Ted approached the plans, his eyes beginning to detect patterns that he had long ceased to perceive. "Wait, these symbols, they're the same ones that Dad used in his research. Notebooks. The language of the first inhabitants," explained Walter. "Ricardo discovered that long before the Spanish, even before the first European settlers, Malibu already had its own guardians. People who understood the importance of preserving knowledge, of protecting truths." Ashley, having completed one more pattern with the boxes, finally stepped away from her work. The projections on the walls now showed a complex network of tunnels and chambers intertwining under the entire island. "That's why Vincent wanted so much to control everything," said June, her breathing stronger than usual with the excitement of the discovery. "It wasn't just about properties or hotels. It was about controlling the island's own history. And that's why Ricardo built this system," added Celia, taking rapid notes in her pad. "He knew that the truth needed to be preserved in a way that transcended physical documents or human testimonies." At that moment, one of the federal agents ran into the chamber. "You need to see this," he said, breathless. "We found something at Vincent's mansion." The group followed the agent to a car where a laptop showed live images of the mansion. In a secret office discovered behind a false bookcase, there were dozens of monitors showing different locations on the island. "A surveillance center," explained the agent. "Vincent wasn't just controlling properties. He was monitoring every inch of Malibu, looking for signs of the ancient tunnels." Ted felt his stomach churn. He knew. All these years, he knew that there was more than just documents at stake. And now I understand why he was so upset when Ashley threw the watch in the river, said Irene, hugging her niece protectively. It wasn't just about the microchip with banking information. The watch was a key, confirmed Walter. Just like the one Ricardo used to wear. They didn't just hold secrets, they were part of a larger system, a living map of the island and its mysteries. Ashley, who had been extraordinarily quiet, suddenly pointed to one of the monitors. There, she said simply. The image showed Malibu Creek, the same location where she had thrown Ted's watch. What's there? Asked Celia, approaching the screen. The beginning, replied the girl, her eyes shining with that ancient wisdom that still surprised everyone. The man in the garden said that it's where everything started and where everything needs to start again. Ted felt something awaken in his memory, a reminder of his father taking him to that same location years ago, talking about cycles and renewal. The creek, he murmured, his hands unconsciously touching the place where he used to wear his own watch. It's not just a creek, it's a guardian, completed Walter, a mysterious smile on his wrinkled face. Just like the lighthouse, just like the tunnels, all part of an ancient system of protection and preservation. June, who had sat down to rest, suddenly took her sewing box. With trembling fingers, she removed one last object hidden in its false bottom, a small antique compass with the same symbols engraved that appeared in the projections. Ricardo gave me this, she said, her voice choked with emotion. The last time I saw him, he said that when the time came, it would show the way not only to the north, but to the truth. The compass, when opened, did not point to magnetic north. Instead, its needle rotated gently until pointing directly to Malibu Creek. I think, said Walter, his voice filled with meaning, that it's time for us to make one last trip. The creek is waiting for us. As the group prepared to leave, Ashley made one last adjustment to the metal boxes. The resulting projection showed something that made everyone hold their breath. A clear image of Ricardo on the day of his disappearance, carrying not one but two identical watches towards the creek. The mystery was far from over. In fact, as Ashley seemed to know from the beginning, they were only just beginning to scratch the surface of a truth much deeper and older than any of them could imagine. Malibu Creek meandered lazily under the afternoon sun, its crystal-clear waters reflecting the sky, now clear after the storm. The group approached the bank in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. June, supported by Irene, held the ancient compass tightly, while Ashley walked ahead, her small bare feet instinctively finding the way between the wet stones. It was here, said the girl, stopping at a specific point on the bank, exactly here that the man in the garden told me to throw the watch. Ted approached, his eyes scanning the landscape with a clarity that he had not felt for decades. Without the drugs Vincent used to suppress his gift, he began to notice subtle patterns in the movement of the water, the arrangement of the stones, even the way the light reflected on the surface of Malibu Creek. The stones, he murmured, kneeling to examine them more closely. They're not naturally arranged, they're part of a larger pattern. Walter smiled, his tired eyes gleaming with approval. Ricardo discovered that too. The stones in the creek form a map that can only be read by those who have the gift to see beyond appearances. Celia, ever methodical, began photographing the area from different angles. Look at this, she called, showing one of the photos on her digital camera. When viewed from above, the arrangement of the stones forms the same symbols we saw at the lighthouse. They're not just symbols, Ashley said, her eyes fixed on a specific point in the water. They're ancient words. The man in the garden said they tell stories. Irene watched her niece with a mixture of pride and concern. How do you understand all this, honey? How do you know so much? Before Ashley could answer, the compass in June's hand began to vibrate gently. The needle, which had been pointing to the creek, now spun rapidly, as if responding to some invisible call. "It's happening again," June said, her voice trembling slightly. Just like the day Ricardo disappeared, the compass, it was acting exactly like this. Theodore took the instrument carefully, his fingers tracing the symbols engraved on its surface. Long-suppressed memories began to emerge. Memories of his father teaching him about the compass, about how it not only pointed directions, but revealed truths. "It's a detector," he explained, his words coming out as if from a distance. "Dad used it to find power spots," he called them, places where the ancient energies of Malibu concentrated. Walter nodded gravely. Ricardo discovered that Malibu wasn't just a town, it was a repository of ancient knowledge. The first inhabitants built a complex system of tunnels and chambers, using the very geography of the place to preserve their wisdom. And Vincent wanted to destroy all of it, Celia completed, consulting her notes, not just to build hotels, but to erase any trace of this ancient knowledge. At that moment, Ashley moved decisively toward the water. Before anyone could stop her, she stepped into the creek up to her knees, her small hands plunging into the clear water. "Ashley," Irene cried, startled, but the girl seemed perfectly at ease. "It's here," she said simply, her hands moving under the water as if following an invisible map. "The other watch, the real one." Theodore entered the water beside her, his eyes wide with understanding. Of course, Dad had two identical watches. One he wore, the other was the master key, Walter completed. The watch that contained not just documents or evidence, but the complete map of the ancient system. Ricardo hid it here, knowing that only someone with the gift could find it. Ashley's hands found something under the water. With surprising precision, she manipulated what appeared to be a hidden mechanism among the stones. A soft click echoed through the air and a small underwater chamber opened. Inside, protected by a waterproof casing, was a watch identical to the one Theodore used to wear, to the one Vincent had stolen from Ricardo, to the one Ashley had thrown into the creek. But this one had something different. A special glow, as if the light itself recognized it as something extraordinary. "The three watches," June murmured, her breathing becoming more difficult with emotion. Ricardo always talked about three watches, three keys to three truths. First watch, Walter explained, was Vincent's, used to keep his dirty secrets. The second, which Ashley threw into the creek, was the one Ricardo used, containing the evidence against Vincent. And this is the original, Theodore completed, his hands trembling as he picked up the object. The watch that the first guardians of Malibu created. As the watch was lifted from the water, something extraordinary happened. The symbols engraved on its surface began to glow softly, responding to the sunlight. The stones in the creek seemed to vibrate in response, and the compass in June's hand spun one last time before stopping, pointing west. "The lighthouse wasn't the only place," Ashley said, her voice carrying that strange mixture of childlike innocence and ancient wisdom. "There are others, many others. The man in the garden said that each place holds a part of the story." Celia, who had been examining the banks of the creek with professional eyes, suddenly called everyone's attention. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of almost invisible markings on the stones. "They're coordinates. The entire creek is a map." "Not just the creek," Theodore said, his eyes sweeping across the landscape with renewed understanding. "The entire town, every beach, every mountain, every stream, everything is part of a larger system." Walter smiled, a smile that seemed to carry the weight and wisdom of many generations. Ricardo used to say that Malibu wasn't just a place, it was a living story, waiting to be read by those who knew how to see beyond appearances. At that moment, the watch in Theodore's hands began to emit a soft tick-tock, unlike any normal mechanical sound. It was as if time itself was whispering long-held secrets. "What now?" Irene asked, hugging Ashley, who had come out of the water. "Now?" Walter replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to slant toward the west. "We follow the path that Ricardo left for us. The compass shows the direction, the watch holds the keys, and Ashley shows us how to see," Theodore completed, finally understanding the girl's special role in this whole story. The group began to prepare for another journey, knowing that what they had discovered in the creek was just the beginning. Somewhere in Malibu, other secrets waited to be revealed, other truths needed to come to light. And as the sun began its descent in the sky, casting long shadows over Malibu Creek, Ashley picked up her school backpack and took out something that surprised everyone. A small, worn notebook, its pages filled with drawings that seemed to predict every moment of this journey. "The man in the garden helped me make it," she said simply. "It's a map to find all the stories that Malibu wants to tell." The mystery of Malibu Creek had been just the first chapter of a much larger story, a story that had begun generations ago and that now, through a special girl and an unlikely group of guardians, would continue to be told. The sun continued its journey westward as the group followed the direction indicated by the ancient compass. Ashley's notebook, now in Theodore's hands, revealed itself to be more extraordinary with each page turned. They weren't just childish drawings, they were detailed maps, complex symbols, and sequences of patterns that seemed to pulsate with life under the light of dusk. "It's incredible," Theodore murmured, his fingers delicately tracing the lines on the paper. "Each drawing corresponds exactly to the patterns I'm starting to see in the landscape. How did you know, honey?" Ashley, who was walking hand in hand with Irene, shrugged with that simplicity characteristic of children. "The man in the garden showed me in dreams. Every night, he told a different part of the story." Walter, who was leading the group along the increasingly steep paths of Malibu, smiled knowingly. "Dreams have always been one of the ways the gift manifests itself. Ricardo also had visions in his dreams. That's how he found the power spots of Malibu." The compass in June's hand continued to vibrate gently, its needle pointing firmly towards a rock formation in the distance. The elderly woman, despite her evident fatigue, seemed stronger with each step they took. "It's the ancient temple," she said, her voice carrying a certainty that surprised everyone. "My mother spoke of it. A sacred place for the first inhabitants of Malibu long before the settlers arrived." Celia, who had been photographically documenting each stage of the journey, approached with interest. "There are no official records of pre-colonial temples in Malibu." "Exactly," replied Walter, his voice low and intense. "Vincent and his associates made sure those records disappeared. They didn't want anyone to know about the sacred places of Malibu, places where ancient knowledge still resists." As they approached the rock formation, previously invisible details began to reveal themselves. What seemed to be a natural stone wall now showed subtle carvings, geometric patterns that could only be human-made. "The symbols," Theodore whispered, his eyes scanning the markings with renewed fascination. "They're the same as on the watch in Ashley's drawings." "The language of the Guardians," confirmed Walter. "A complete alphabet, not just of letters, but of entire concepts. Each symbol tells a story, holds a secret." Ashley gently released Irene's hand and walked to the rock wall. Without hesitation, her small fingers found specific points among the symbols, pressing them in a sequence that seemed to have been rehearsed 1,000 times. A soft sound of ancient mechanisms echoed through the air, and a section of the rock began to move, revealing a hidden entrance. The air that escaped from the opening carried an aroma of preserved time, of secrets kept for generations. "How did you know the sequence?" Irene asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's on the watch," Ashley replied, pointing to the object in Theodore's hands. "The numbers aren't numbers, they're instructions. The man in the garden taught me to read it." Theodore examined the watch more closely. The numbers on its face, which had always seemed perfectly normal, now revealed subtle patterns in their formation. They weren't common numerals. They were disguised symbols, each containing coded information. Ricardo spent years deciphering this code, Walter explained, as the group carefully entered the newly revealed passage. He discovered that the first guardians of Malibu had created a complex system of knowledge preserved through generations. In places like this, the interior of the temple was surprising. It wasn't a simple cave, but a space architected with mathematical precision. The walls, covered in symbols from floor to ceiling, seemed to tell an endless story. In the center of the room, a stone pedestal rose, its surface marked with a circular depression, exactly the size of the watch. "It's an activation mechanism," Celia said, her professional eyes assessing the structure. "Like in the lighthouse, but on a much larger scale." Theodore approached the pedestal, the watch pulsing softly in his hands as if it recognized its destiny. With reverent care, he placed the object in the depression. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. The symbols on the walls began to glow with their own light, creating patterns that moved like living constellations. It was as if the temple itself had awakened from a long sleep. "It's an archive," June whispered, her eyes filled with emotion. "Like the one at the lighthouse, but this one holds something much older." Ashley walked around the circular space, her eyes following the patterns of light naturally, as if she were reading a familiar book. "It's the true story," she said. "The story that Vincent wanted to hide." The projections on the walls began to tell a visual narrative. They showed Malibu in different eras. First, as it was known by the original peoples, then during colonization, and finally in the present. In each period, secret guardians protected the ancient knowledge, passing it on through generations. Ricardo was more than a businessman with a social conscience, Walter explained, his voice filled with emotion. He was the last of an ancient lineage of guardians. When he discovered that Vincent planned to destroy the sacred places of Malibu to build his developments, he began to prepare a contingency plan. "The 3 watches," Theodore completed, finally understanding. "One to keep the evidence against Vincent, another to preserve the location of the sacred places, and this," he indicated the watch on the pedestal, "to awaken the knowledge when the moment is right." At that instant, something extraordinary happened. The projections on the walls began to converge in the center of the temple, forming a 3-dimensional image of the entire town. Every power spot, every sacred location, every secret passage was revealed in a living, pulsing map. "It's a complete map of the system," Celia said, marveling. "All the places that Vincent tried to hide, all the secrets he tried to bury. And look," pointed out Irene, indicating a specific point on the map. "The house where we live. It's no coincidence that it was built there." Each property that Ricardo built, Walter explained, was strategically positioned over an ancient power spot. He created a network of protection, using modern architecture to camouflage and preserve the sacred sites. Ashley, who had been watching the map with concentrated attention, suddenly pointed to a specific point. "There," she said with certainty, "that's where it all began, where the first guardian made their promise." The location indicated was a small, seemingly insignificant cove on the west coast of Malibu. But when everyone looked more closely, they realized that the energy patterns on the map converged to that point like rivers flowing to the sea. "The place of the beginning," Walter murmured, a gleam of recognition in his eyes. Ricardo spoke of it, said that it was where the true story of Malibu was kept. The compass in June's hand began to spin frantically, as if responding to some ancestral call. The watch on the pedestal pulsed harder, its hands moving in impossible patterns. "We need to go there," Ashley said with a certainty that brooked no discussion. "The man in the garden said that's where we'll find the last key." "The last key?" Irene questioned, hugging her niece protectively. "To free his father," the girl replied, pointing to Theodore. "The true guardian hasn't disappeared. He's waiting, protecting the greatest secret of all." A deep silence fell over the group as the implications of that revelation were processed. Ricardo hadn't been eliminated by Vincent, as everyone thought. He had become part of something bigger, something that transcended time and common space. And now, with the sun setting on the horizon and the shadows lengthening over Malibu, the group prepared for the final stage of their journey. A journey that began with the theft of a watch by a special girl, and which now revealed itself as part of a much larger plan, woven through generations of guardians dedicated to protecting not just a town, but an ancient and powerful truth. Twilight painted the sky over Malibu with deep shades of purple and orange as the group headed toward the mysterious cove. The path was difficult, through dense vegetation that seemed simultaneously to want to hinder and guide their steps. Ashley, tireless despite the hours of walking, continued ahead, her small feet naturally finding the safest passages. June, supported by Irene, kept the ancient compass firmly in her hands. The instrument had begun to emit a low, continuous hum, increasing in intensity as they approached their destination. Her breathing, normally labored, seemed lighter in that environment, as if the very air carried some kind of revitalizing energy. "It's as if Malibu is alive," she murmured, her eyes scanning the ancient trees that surrounded them. "As if every stone, every leaf is part of something bigger." Walter, who was walking nearby, nodded knowingly. The first guardians believed that Malibu wasn't just a piece of land in the ocean, it was a conscious being, a guardian in itself. Theodore, who had been extraordinarily quiet since the revelation in the temple, carried the ancient watch with reverence. His hands occasionally trembled, not from fatigue, but from a deep emotion that threatened to overflow. "All these years," he said, his voice choked, "I believed that my father had abandoned me, that he had chosen his dreams and theories over his own family. Vincent made me believe—" "Vincent made you believe many lies," Celia interrupted gently. The detective had been documenting every aspect of the journey, but her usual professionalism was clearly affected by the magnitude of what they were discovering. Ashley stopped abruptly, causing a small confusion among those who followed her. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the dense vegetation. "There," she said simply, pointing to a rock formation partially covered by vines. The group approached cautiously. At first glance, it seemed just another natural stone wall, but under Theodore's attentive gaze, who was now rapidly regaining his sensitivity to patterns, details began to emerge. "They're the same symbols," he said, his fingers tracing almost invisible markings on the rock. "But there's something different here. Something older." Walter approached, his tired eyes examining the markings with interest. "This is the original dialect," he explained. "What Ricardo found in his deepest research. The symbols we've seen so far were translations, adaptations. These are the originals." Ashley was already moving her hands over the surface of the rock, her small fingers finding specific points with an impossible precision. But this time, something was different. The wall didn't move as the others had done. "It needs more," she said, turning to Theodore. "It needs the father and the son." Theodore felt his heart race. With hesitant steps, he approached the rock wall. The watch in his hands began to pulse more strongly, as if responding to some ancestral call. "Put your hands where mine are," Ashley instructed, and Theodore obeyed. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. The rock under their hands began to vibrate with an ancient energy, and long dormant symbols began to glow with their own light. It was as if the entire mountainside had awakened. "The original guardians," Walter explained, his voice filled with reverence, "created this place as a nexus, a point where all the secrets of Malibu meet. But it can only be accessed when the circle is complete." "The circle?" Irene questioned, hugging June protectively as a sudden and inexplicable breeze arose around them. "Father and son," Walter replied, "the current guardian and his successor." Ricardo knew that one day Theodore would regain his gift, his true nature. All his plan, all his actions were preparation for this moment. The rock wall began to move, not sliding like the others, but unfolding like a complex flower of stone. Layers and more layers of rock separated in precise geometric patterns, revealing a passage that descended deep into the earth. The air emerging from the opening was surprisingly fresh and carried a scent of the sea, even though it was apparently far from the beach. The sound of running water echoed from the depths, mixed with something that sounded almost like music. "It's the heart of Malibu," Ashley said, her small voice carrying that strange mixture of childlike innocence and ancient wisdom. "Where all the stories begin and end." Theodore took a step toward the passage, but Ashley stopped him with a surprisingly authoritative gesture. "First," she said, taking something out of her school backpack, "we need to be prepared." It was her drawing notebook, but now the pages glowed softly in the twilight light. The drawings that had once seemed simple, childish scribbles now revealed themselves as complex maps, detailed instructions for what was to come. "Ricardo left clues everywhere," Walter explained, examining the drawings with renewed interest. "In the watches, in the buildings, in the very patterns of nature. But he knew he would need someone special to put all the pieces together." "That's why he chose me," Ashley said simply. "The man in the garden said I could see the stories as they really are." June, who had been examining the ancient compass carefully, suddenly gasped. The needle was no longer pointing in one direction. It was spinning in a complex pattern that mirrored exactly the drawings in Ashley's notebook. "It's a map," Theodore said, finally understanding. "Not just of the place, but of time. Each spin of the needle represents a different moment in the history of Malibu. And look," added Celia, who had been photographing the drawings, "when we overlap the images." She manipulated her digital camera, showing several photos in quick succession. The effect was impressive. Ashley's drawings, when seen in succession, created an animation that showed a specific path through underground tunnels. "Ricardo didn't disappear in that storm," Walter said, his voice low and intense. "He found something. Something so important, so fundamental, that he needed to become its permanent guardian." "What exactly did he find?" Irene asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The truth about Malibu," Ashley replied, already preparing to enter the passage. "It's not just a town, it's a portal. A portal to where?" Theodore questioned, his heart racing with possibilities that his adult mind could barely comprehend. "To when," Ashley corrected. "The man in the garden said that time here is different, that sometimes we can see the same sun rise twice, not because it comes back, but because we come back." The group prepared for the descent, each carrying a piece of the puzzle that had brought them there. Theodore with the ancient watch, June with the compass, Ashley with her notebook of prophetic drawings, Walter with decades of guarded knowledge, Celia with her meticulously documented evidence, and Irene with her unwavering faith in her special niece. The passage awaited them, spiraling down into the heart of Malibu. The sound of water and music grew louder, and a soft light emanated from the walls themselves, as if the path were alive, breathing, waiting. "Dad's down there," Theodore said, not as a question, but as a certainty that came from the depths of his being. All these years, he's been so close. Protecting something bigger than all of us, Walter completed. Something that Vincent could never understand, let alone control. Ashley took the first step into the descent, her small figure illuminated by the mysterious light of the walls. "Come on," she called. "The man in the garden said it's time. Malibu is ready to tell its last story." And so, as the last colors of twilight disappeared in the sky above, the group began their final descent into the heart of Malibu, to the encounter, with truths that transcended time and space, to the moment when all the stories, all the lives, all the secrets would finally meet in a single point of light and truth. The descent seemed endless, as if each step took them not only deeper into the earth, but through time itself. The walls of the tunnel pulsed with a soft light that subtly changed color, creating patterns that told ancient stories to those who knew how to see. The sound of water and music grew gradually, transforming into a complex symphony that seemed to come from all directions. Ashley led the way with a serene confidence, her steps small but firm, following a rhythm that only she could hear. Her drawing notebook, now open in her hands, glowed with its own light, the symbols on the pages dancing like living constellations. Theodore followed close behind, the ancient watch pulsing in his hands like a mechanical heart. Each beat seemed to resonate with the very walls of the tunnel, creating a silent dialogue between the artifact and the place that had waited for it for so long. "The symbols are changing," he observed, his eyes scanning the walls with renewed fascination. "They're no longer just historical records. They're more like predictions," completed Walter, his voice laden with ancient knowledge. "Time here doesn't flow as it does up there. The original Guardians discovered that this place exists in a different state, where past, present, and future meet." June, who was walking supported by Irene, suddenly stopped. The compass in her hands had begun to vibrate with a new intensity, its needle spinning in impossible patterns. "It's happening again," she whispered, her breathing surprisingly strong and clear in this strange environment. "Like that day. The day Ricardo." Before she could complete the sentence, the tunnel opened into an immense circular chamber, so large that the soft light barely reached its vaulted ceiling. In the center, a column of crystal-clear water rose from the floor and disappeared into the darkness above, surrounded by concentric circles of ancient stone covered in luminous symbols. "The heart of Malibu," Ashley said simply, her voice echoing. Strangely, in the vast space, Celia, who had been documenting everything with her camera, lowered the equipment with trembling hands. "It's impossible. This chamber, it shouldn't exist. Not at this depth, not with this structure." "Malibu has its own secrets," replied Walter, a mysterious smile on his wrinkled face. "Secrets that Vincent never understood, even trying so hard to control them." Theodore approached the column of water, the watch in his hands pulsing increasingly stronger. The symbols on the floor began to glow more intensely beneath his feet, forming patterns that moved like waves on an ocean of light. "Dad?" he called, his voice trembling with decades of contained emotion. "Are you here?" As if in response, the water in the central column began to move differently, creating patterns that reflected and refracted the light in thousands of directions. The walls of the chamber seemed to come to life, projecting images that moved like a film made of light and shadow. "Look," whispered Irene, pointing to the projections. On the walls, the history of Malibu unfolded in overlapping layers of time. They saw the first inhabitants, the original Guardians, building this underground sanctuary. They saw the arrival of the settlers, the transformation of the town, and how the secrets were preserved through generations of dedicated Guardians. Each Guardian, Walter explained, added their own story, their own layer of protection. Ricardo discovered that it wasn't just about preserving the past, it was about protecting all possibilities for the future. Ashley moved to the first circle of stone, her small fingers tracing specific symbols that seemed to respond to her touch. "The man in the garden is coming," she announced simply. The water in the central column began to move faster, its patterns becoming more complex and defined. Gradually, a form began to materialize, not made of water or light, but of something in between. "Ricardo," whispered June, tears running freely down her face. The figure that emerged was Ricardo Montgomery, exactly as in the old photographs, but also different. There was an ethereal quality to his presence, as if he existed simultaneously in multiple moments of time. "My son," he said, his voice sounding both physical and mental. "Finally you have found your way back." Theodore fell to his knees, the watch in his hands shining like a star. Dad, Vincent made me forget, made me believe." "I know," Ricardo interrupted gently. "Time here allows me to see all the paths, all the possible futures. I knew Vincent would try this, just as I knew that one day you would break his chains." "But why?" Theodore asked, decades of doubt and pain overflowing in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me the truth before? Why wait so long?" Ricardo smiled, a smile that seemed to contain all the wisdom and sadness of the world. "Because some truths need to be discovered, not just told, and because we needed her," he gestured to Ashley. The girl smiled, a smile that mirrored Ricardo's in an almost supernatural way. "I saw you," she said, "every night in the garden, showing me the paths, teaching me to see." "Yes, little one," Ricardo replied. "You have the purest gift I've seen. Since my own son, before Vincent poisoned him with drugs and lies." Walter stepped forward. "The dreams, the visions, you've been guiding us this whole time." Ricardo nodded. "This place, this sanctuary, exists at a point where all times meet. From here I could see the possible paths. I could guide subtly, wait for the right moment." "And now?" Celia asked, her investigative nature momentarily overriding her awe. "What happens to all the evidence? All the justice will take its course up there," Ricardo replied. "But down here, we have something more important to protect." He turned to Theodore. "Son, are you ready to see the complete truth? To understand your true purpose?" Theodore stood up, decades of confusion and pain transforming into a crystal-clear clarity. "Yes," he answered simply. Ricardo gestured, and the water in the central column transformed into a cascade of images and symbols. "Malibu isn't just a town," he explained. "It's a nexus, a point where the timelines meet. The first Guardians discovered that here, in this specific place, it was possible to see beyond the veil of time." "The visions," Theodore murmured, finally understanding. "The patterns I've always seen, they weren't just intuition or heightened sensitivity." "No," Ricardo confirmed. "It's a gift passed down through generations of Guardians, the ability to see the connections between all moments, all possible futures. Vincent wanted to use this gift for power and control. But its true purpose is to protect," Ashley completed. "To protect the stories, the paths, the possibilities." Ricardo smiled at the girl. "Exactly. And now, with Vincent neutralized, we can finally restore the balance. Theodore, you and Ashley are the next Guardians. Together, you will keep the paths open, the stories alive." The entire chamber pulsed with light, the stone circles spinning gently like a cosmic mechanism awakening. The watch in Theodore's hands began to glow intensely, responding to the energy of the place. "It's time," Ricardo said. "Time to rewrite the stories that Vincent tried to erase, to restore the connections he tried to break." Ashley was already In motion, her notebook open, her prophetic drawings shining with a light that harmonized with the patterns of the chamber. Theodore joined her, the watch in his hands pulsing in sync with the heart of Malibu. June, Irene, Celia, and Walter watched in reverent silence as father, son, and the little guardian began a ritual older than Malibu itself. The walls of the chamber exploded in colors and symbols, telling not only the stories of the past, but weaving new futures, new possibilities. And so, in the heart of Malibu, where time flowed like water and stories lived like light, a new era began. An era of truth, of protection, of infinite possibilities guarded by those who could see beyond the veil of time. The sun would rise twice the next morning, but this time everyone would know the true meaning of this daily miracle, a reminder that some stories need to be seen more than once to be truly understood, and that the greatest treasures are not those we can possess, but those we choose to protect.